He sat on the bank while the river still chattered onto him, a babbling procession of the best stories in the world. That was the excitement that Mole experienced in the story Wind in the Willows. And indeed, rivers large and small everywhere all have many stories to tell. The River Ouse that flows through Lewes is no different. In fact, for much of the town's history, it has played an important part. Today, the river carries nothing but pleasure craft. But for a long time, it was a busy, bustling port. About a mile upstream from here is the village of Hamsey. It sits on a triangle of land which splits the river as it curves down towards the town. Hamsey is barely a village today. A few houses with the 13th century church standing in splendid isolation. But Hamsey was a Saxon port in the pre-Norman era. Historians estimate that over 1,000 people lived here, populating a port that saw ships sail up the Ouse to trade goods. There is no doubt that the Normans had a bit to do with its demise. The area was handed over to a Norman lord. But the community was attacked by an enemy it couldn't stop. An army of rats, which disembarked from one of the visiting ships, went ashore and infected the village with bubonic plague. The Black Death. The disease devastated Hamsey. And while there is no historic evidence, legend has it that the residents barricaded themselves in to prevent unaffected people coming in and diseased people getting out. Eventually, they starved to death. Named after the black rats which carried the plague, the Black Death killed over half the population in Britain between 1348 and 1349. The survivors founded another village off Ham, the modern thriving village of Opham. The plague attacked Lewes several times over the following centuries, each time causing significant loss of life. So death continued to stalk Lewes, bringing tragedy to the high street in rather greater measure than other UK high streets. Hamsey gone, but Lewes as a port flourished. Ships and barges plied their trade up and down the Ouse, creating an exciting and bustling waterway. Many of these buildings, which stand on an extension of the high street in an area called Cliff, are built with old ship's timbers. Where Argos now stands was a sailor's pub called the Bear, built as a brewery in 1787, and it succumbed to the carelessness of revelry and burned down in 1918. This quiet domestic street, which runs for a short distance parallel to the Ouse, was the sailors' playground, and history relates that there were more than a dozen brothels successfully operating. Today, this street is known as Little Chelsea. Even the name makes it seem a nice place to live. The rather small abodes have found favour with many modern Louisians and are now favoured homes. And why not?
They look good in a twee kind of way.
And if you're not living in a former brothel, there are other historical backgrounds to raise the interest.
All this talk of pubs and trading around town, it saps my energy. So I sometimes come to this little oasis. The Notts Garden in Southover Park. A lovely little hideaway.
Back to the High Street, or at least its extension into the cliff area of Lewes. So I've been wandering around here because Lewes is full of antique stores and models. As I mentioned, go inside some of these shops and you'll find that they're supported by old ship's timbers. Another reminder of the days when Lewes was a port. All this talk of water has made me thirsty. I made several mentions of the time Lewes had 63 pubs.
As you would expect, among the 16 that are left, there are some with strong ties to the community.
Over the road from the shops, held up by ship's timbers, is the Gardener's Arms. There seems to be a tradition in Lewes, although no one admits to it, of omitting the epithet pub or tavern. This pub is called by locals simply the Gardeners. And the Gardeners it was. The origins of this pub go back to when it was an ordinary house, owned by a gardener. Often, after work, he would invite other gardeners into his front room for a drink. Eventually, it made sense to formalise the ritual. So it turned into a pub. The Gardener's is a true pub. Unusual now, it only serves pork pies and sausage rolls. Yet each year it's in the top tier of finalists for Pub of the Year. Magnificent. Back to the Street of 1,000 Brothels. Well, perhaps not 1,000, but a few anyway. There's a pub called the Snowdrop. Nice pub, they tell me. Interesting for its name and where it stands. This is the site of England's deadliest avalanche. Just after Christmas in 1836, heavy snow built up on the edge of the downs. There were 7 cottages here where the pub now stands. Despite warnings, the people living there went about their business, totally unconcerned about the snow.
Then whoosh, down it came,
demolishing 7 cottages and taking the lives of 8 people.
Time, gentlemen, please.
Not heard now, but the admonishment of past landlords that it was time to quit drinking should have been heeded by the cottagers. A disaster both for the country and the town. A brief mention of one last hostelry, the John Harvey Tavern. Named after the founder of a local brewery, the one of 16 to survive to the modern day, Harvey's has been around since at least 1790. And an important inhabitant. along with Mole and Ratty on the banks of the River Ouse. More on that later. For the moment, back to the bar. How I wish I'd lived in Lewes when it had 63 pubs. Bliss.